And have a conversation. Don't be shy. We're gonna just getting warmed up. So microphones coming around to you, and we'll get this underway.
If elected, what do you plan to do about CPS corruption across the U.S.?
Well, corruption across the U.S. So tell me what you mean by CPS.
Child
Child protection. Yeah. So listen. So there's a couple issues here. There's the easy stuff, and then there's the hard stuff. The easy stuff is we need to enforce the laws that are already on the books. People say we need new laws. We can debate new laws. We have fine laws on the books. We're just not enforcing them. So part of my plan to shut down the FBI, it's not just about rooting out political corruption. It's an institution that has failed to even provide security in enforcing the existing laws. You know who's been a lot better at that in the federal government? The U.S. Marshals. So I said I'll shut down the FBI. The 20,000 back office employees reporting to the J. Edgar Hoover building, they can go home and find honest work in the private sector. But 15,000 of them on the front lines are agents, good people doing potentially good work. We're going to move them to the U.S. Marshals. We'll move some of them to the DEA to take on the fentanyl crisis with greater specialization. Even the ones with financial crimes, put them in the Treasury Department where you have the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. This is actually how you reorganize that federal government. These aren't slogans to me. When I say shut down the FBI, I really mean we're going to get in there and shut down the FBI, but not because we're going to trade off the enforcement of laws. For example, I think the crisis that we have in the way children are being trafficked in and within and beyond and into this country, but to be much more effective in how we're actually addressing that crisis. And the U.S. Marshals hasn't also been politicized in the same way that the FBI has. This is how we actually drive change. Now, I think that there's a lot else we could talk about. Sealing the border is an important component here. Enforcing the existing laws are a component here. But I think that there's also a separate issue that we need to have the courage to discuss. There's a demand side problem in this country. There's a culture of pornography in this country that I think is something we have to confront. I mean, most kids have actually been, by the age of 12 or so, a majority of kids have been exposed to pornography by the age of 12. We don't talk about this stuff. You're not supposed to talk about it. You sweep it under the rug, pretend like it doesn't exist. If you're going to stand for the truth, you got to speak the truth. Social media is a big source of where perpetrators and child victims actually establish their first point of contact. My view is, for so many reasons, if you're not old enough to smoke an addictive cigarette by the age of 18, or to have an addictive drink of alcohol by the age of 21, you should not be using an addictive social media product by the age of 16 either. Especially when kids are getting Snapchat-driven Percocet laced with fentanyl. That's where they're getting it, on Snapchat. It's where they're actually setting up rendezvous for people who end up becoming child traffickers. These are taboo topics. You're not supposed to say this in public. I think we have to have the courage to confront the truth, the culture of sexualization, perpetuated by the proliferating cancer of social media, especially in youth. To have the courage to say, we're actually going to hold the hard line. No social media under the age of 16. We will protect our children. Children should not be exposed to pornography and a culture of hypersexualization at a young age. And by the way, a lot of that's happening even through our own schools in the name of transgender education. No. We have to stand for what's right. So the easy part, I will absolutely get through and do it. That's something the U.S. president can do on his own without asking Congress for permission or forgiveness. Reorganize the federal government, make sure we actually enforce the federal laws on the books, not by going and indicting our political opponents, spending the FBI's resources doing that instead of actually protecting Americans on American soil. That much will get done on day one. But I can't fix the culture alone. I really mean this. I think it's important for all of us to understand this. We fall into this trap of thinking there's going to be some political messiah coming from on high from the White House to save us. It doesn't work that way, guys. I'm not letting you all off the hook that easily either. If we are going to be saved, it is going to be because we save ourselves. There are some things the president can do. I do believe in a youth ban on any form of algorithmic social media. But it's going to take a culture of other leaders. Not just state representatives and legislators too, but parents, coaches, community leaders, stepping up and standing up with the spine too against the culture of hypersexualization that drives some of the underbelly of the beast that is at least 50% of this problem as well. Thank you for that question. I appreciate you. Thank you. Okay, please.
Hi. I first just want to start off with a comment. I loved your debate the other night, and when I'm talking to people about you, the worst thing that they can say is, he sounds too good to be true. And so I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. Do you want him to be worse? Or, so
I'm Chat GPT.
Yes, I heard that. That's great. The question I have, okay, first, homeschool mom, 7 kids. Love what you're doing about that contest you had.
7 kids homeschooled. Give her a round of applause.
This is my homeschooling sister of 5 kids too. So
nice.
we're gonna take over the world together.
Nice.
But okay, so what I love is about education, it's quality, affordable education, and I love how you talked about the Egyptians when God said, "Here's a promised land. You're gonna go out and secure it." And they look back to Pharaoh to take care of their needs.
Yes.
And so the other night you said something about the $80 cajillion that funds the National Department of Education, and you said something about returning it to the families.
Yes.
Okay, that's a hot issue right now, and I'm trying to figure out how it intersects with the federal level. So my question is going to be, what do you mean by that?
Yep.
Because
Good.
I think ultimately we need to set parents free.
Yes.
And I think anybody, a commodity belongs to the person that pays for it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so I am very cautious that the taxpayers don't own education, that parents own
it. Yes.
education.
Yes. So this is a great question. Let's go into a little more depth. Okay, so the head of the snake in the U.S. failed education system is the U.S. Department of Education. They spend about $80 billion per year on a function that the federal government itself should not be involved with in the first place. That's just a hard fact. Okay? What I want to do is to take that money and to put it in the hands of parents. And I assure you know, there are real concerns with the mechanics of how this works. So my view is you have to have a school choice option in order to be able to get those funds in the first place. That means every state has to probably have a program like that exists in Iowa to provide mobility, to say parents get to choose where they send their kids to school, regardless of whether or not they're trapped in a given zip code. This is the civil rights issue of our time. There's a second component to this. So I call it school choice on steroids. That's a traditional school choice view. You should have the ability to have economic mobility for your kids. I want to take that to the next level because here's another underbelly of the U.S. education system that isn't discussed, but it is a fact. The schools that spend the most money per student are also the schools that deliver the worst educational outcomes per student. So I want you to track me here for a second. I'll give you a real specific example. Like in New York, some of the worst schools are spending $40,000 per student per year. 10 miles away, you'll have a charter school or private school that spends closer to $12,000 per student per year. That's a $28,000 difference. What I believe is when someone switches from school A to school B, the parent should be able to take half that money, that difference, with them on a per student basis. So if that's $28,000, you get to take half that money with you, $14,000, put it in the kid's account. There's two reasons for this. One is it starves the bureaucracy. Part of the poison that comes from the school system foisted onto our kids, some of it comes from the Department of Education that says, you as a public school don't get this money unless you adopt these toxic racial and gender ideologies. That's why many schools are adopting them. Then they're swimming in bureaucracy, overfunded in a way that doesn't benefit the schools. That's the condition that allows a lot of toxicity, wokeism otherwise, to fester. So now we're really talking. You put, by the way, that money into that kid's account, that's a $250,000 graduation gift when that kid graduates from college, even if it's invested normally. Think about what is a better use of money. Now at the local level, in order to be able to get that, I think a state has to adopt the same provisions in its teachers' contracts for public schools that I will use in the federal government, which is abolishing teachers' unions or collective bargaining protections for the public schools. So now we're talking about public schools competing with private schools, right? Parents have true choice. We have true choice, true mobility, true competition. My view is that if you're going to teach it in the classroom, you better put it on the internet. And if you're unwilling to put it on the internet, you should question whether you're teaching it in the classroom. Now we have true mobility, true transparency, true choice. That's the conditions for a bottom-up revival of civic education. My view is every kid who graduates from high school should have to pass the same civics test that every immigrant has to pass in order to become a citizen of this country. You got to know something about the country in order to respect and value the country. And all of this is only half the battle, because education begins with the family. Whether or not you're a homeschooler, which I respect immensely, that's a courageous decision to make. And in many cases, the right decision to make. But for those who send their kids to public schools or to private schools, still education begins with the family. Now we have a federal government that is spending more money, taxpayer money, to tell women that they get paid more not to have a man in the house than to have a man in the house. So you create the economic incentives, you get what you pay for. We have 25% of kids being born into fatherless homes today that are 8 times more likely to end up in jail, 10 times less likely to graduate from high school. So we're using taxpayer money to subsidize that. So if you take the totality of what I shared with you there, some of that can be led by the U.S. president, some of that has to come bottom up from the states. Right? Back to my earlier point. Each of us has to do our part. The president alone is not going to lead a full national revival. I'm a 10th Amendment absolutist. I believe that which is not reserved to the federal government is reserved respectively to the states and to the people. But you have a good governor in the state. There are other good governors in the state. If we lead a landslide election in 2024, and by the way, that's my job in this race. I do not think this could be another 50.1 election for so many reasons. I think we need a moral mandate to see this through. A Reagan 1980 style revolution in this country. If you look at the way I'm running this campaign, I'm going to some non-traditional places, from the south side of Chicago to Kensington in the middle of Philadelphia. We've been to California already. I think this has to be a landslide moral mandate election. That puts us in a position, both at the federal level and at state and local levels, to drive this national revival bottom up, a multi-ethnic, working class majority that actually delivers on the promises that I'm articulating. But shutting down the Department of Education, setting up the conditions for which that money can flow back to states to then, through their respective choice programs, to be able to put that in the hands of parents, that's going to require states to play ball with that, but it creates the incentives for the states to do it. This is how we create an educational system that goes back to being about the achievement of students rather than employment opportunities for teachers and the unions. And by the way, to admit that education is not just happening in the schools, it starts in the family. And yes, that the nuclear family, both parents in the house, is the best known and greatest known form of governance to man, and we should not pay people to disincentivize them from family formation. That gives you a sense of how I think about it. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. I'm enjoying it. But I have a question that, well, we've been hearing in the news that you had taken money from the liberal Democratic supporter George Soros. I'd like to know if this is true and what you used it for and why.
Yeah. So the short answer to that is, like many things that are showing up in the media as I've risen in the polls, that is flat out false. Like, not an iota of truth to it. Now, I will tell you where they're getting it from. So I've never taken a dime or dollar from George Soros, who I have been one of the most vocal critics of. I think he's been a toxic force on our politics, especially from the last 10 years, where he's been funding these disastrous soft on crime prosecutors that are in part responsible for the wave of crimes infesting our cities. But what they're using, and I'm new to politics, so I'm learning how these games are played. You know, when people get threatened, they make up stuff about you. There was a generic scholarship that at the age of 24 I won that was funded not by George Soros, but by another guy who had the last name Soros. It was a family member of Soros who had independent wealth and as an entrepreneur in this country who's dead also. And it's a generic scholarship that hundreds of kids win to go to graduate school, that pay for part of graduate school. I won that at the age of 24 in 2010. I would have had to be a true fool to turn down that scholarship at the age of 24. But the fact of the matter is, if you run for U.S. president, people are going to take that and rake you through the mud over it. I mean, the reality is, and I don't hold this against the other guys either, Donald Trump took a $160 million loan from George Soros shortly before he ran in 2016. Is that disqualifying for him? No, he's a businessman. He does what he does when he's smart. Does that mean George Soros owns him? No. And Ron DeSantis has been criticized because George Soros' investment partners hosted a fundraiser for him in June, and George Soros praised him online. Ron DeSantis doesn't control that either. So I'm not one of these guys that's going to do the virtue signaling thing and pick at the others. But as it relates to my view on this campaign, at first it was kind of irritating when people run these smears, but the more I think about it, we should be skeptical, actually. And we've been taught to be skeptical if we learned something over the last 20 years in this country. But we do have a government that systematically has lied to us. And we've lied about, lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, lied about the need for bailouts in the 2008 financial crisis, lied about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, lied about now the Hunter Biden laptop story, lied about that Nashville shooter manifesto, the transgender shooter who shot 6 people in a Christian school. We still haven't seen the manifesto released. I think lied now about how our money is being spent in Ukraine, lied about the origin of the COVID pandemic, lied about what we knew about vaccine mandates. And so when you have a government and an establishment that has systematically lied, I actually now have gotten to a place where I embrace it. I get it. Most people in this country hadn't heard of me 6 months ago. People said, you started at 0% in March. I said, no, I didn't start at 0%. I started at 0.0% in March. And now I'm, at second in many of these national polls, and I'm running to be the next commander-in-chief of this country. And that is a serious position that deserves serious scrutiny for anybody who puts themselves in that position. And at this point, seeing it that way, I embrace it. And I think that is part of the process of having conviction in selecting the next president. But I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm grateful for those who actually ask questions honestly. Thank you for that. Thank you. Please.
Simple question. Do you have a plan to prevent the opposition from stealing the next election?
So, I'm going to be really honest with you. I need to get there, right, to be in a position. I'm a private citizen. I'm a businessman right now. I've stepped aside from my businesses. Now I'm a candidate. But I'm a private citizen. I have no government authority or control right now. Here's what I believe we need to get to as a destination. All right, and this is one where I said I want to reunite the country. I will stick true to this promise. I will offer a compromise to anybody in the country on this. Okay, a happy way forward. Which is to say, in this country we have single-day voting on Election Day as a national holiday with paper ballots and government-issued ID to match the voter file. That's how elections must be run in this country. That is a hard requirement for faith in our elections. But in return, here's the promise I will make, and I'll ask all of you to keep this with me because I care about reuniting this country. We will get there. And when we get there, here's my pledge to the other side, and I intend to keep the pledge, which is that once we have those basics, which should not be controversial, then, and only then, but then we are done complaining about election integrity and stolen elections. You give me single-day voting on Election Day with paper ballots and government-issued voter ID matching the voter file, I will keep my end of the bargain, where I will not complain about stolen elections or election integrity. That should be something that moves this nation forward. So on a given day, you can tune into MSNBC or wherever and hear about the threats to our democracy from even asking that question. That you as an election denier are posing a threat to our democracy. I always wonder whose democracy they really mean. Our democracy. But if this is really such a vital issue, we have a simple agreement, hiding in plain sight, of something we can effectuate, a national holiday where everybody votes with a paper ballot and a government-issued ID. That should be something that, if this is really that grave of a risk to our republic, and I do think election integrity is important, and faith in elections is important, this is a solvable problem. So that's where I'll lead us. In order to get us there, I need to be your next president, which poses a bit of a dilemma, because we have an election that's required to put me in that office as your next president, which is why I go back to what I said earlier. This cannot be a 50.1 election. This has to be a landslide. This is not rhetoric, guys. If this is an election where MSNBC and CNN are slowly trotting out the winner the Monday after the Tuesday when we vote. I don't know if we have it in us as a country to withstand the cracking of the thin ice that takes place on the back of that. I am genuinely worried about that. And I just want to use this as an opportunity to speak candidly about why I'm in this race. I got asked this morning, but I had some very positive things to say day before yesterday about Donald Trump on the debate stage. I stand by them. I can't believe people found it eye-opening when I said that. I said he was the greatest president we've had in the 21st century, and I won't apologize for it. That's a fact. So people are like, did he just say that? Yes. George Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, it's not even close, right? And so I don't know that that was a head-spinning thing to say, but then you get the question, well, then why are you in this race? I am in this race because I think I am the single person who is going to be able to deliver that landslide election that we need in order to save this country. That is what's on the line. Republican or Democrat, this cannot be a 50.1 election. We are not that far from a breaking point as a country, right? Sometimes that's only easy to see in retrospect. You got to see it in advance to prevent it from happening. This is where we are right now. So I'm not running strictly in the traditional sense as a Republican candidate. I could care less. I'm running as a pro-American candidate. That's what matters. Do you agree with the basic rules of the road? Right? Do you agree on the pursuit of excellence, free speech, open debate, self-governance over aristocracy? Do we agree on the basic rules of the road? I think 80% of this country does, actually. And I think half the 20 are people younger than me who never learned those ideals in the first place. We'll teach them and bring that 10% along too. Yeah, maybe we disagree on whether corporate tax rates should be high or low in a given year. Those are details. But on the basic rules of the road, if you don't get it through the media or social media, you get it by being in rooms like this with, and I know most of you in this room probably agree with those ideals, but I challenge you. I believe that most of your neighbors and your classmates and your colleagues share these ideals in common too. I truly believe that. I think you do too, but you're not quite sure about it because we don't feel free to talk about it in the open. Right? So that's how we call the bluff on the manufactured division across the country, is each of us has to start talking openly again. That's why this campaign has been so unfiltered. Right? Speaking the truth about the topics you're not supposed to talk about in public, because that's exactly how we unite this country. And as somebody who's 38 years old with fresh legs, who's, I hope, God willing, my best days are still ahead of me. I don't know that. I don't take any day for granted. Every day we wake up is a blessing. I don't take for granted the fact that I got to wake up in Wisconsin, that I'm with you guys here today. But I hope and pray that my best days may still yet be ahead of me. And I think it takes somebody in that position to see a nation whose best days can still as yet be ahead of itself. And I think that is what it's going to take to deliver a landslide, to not just win this election, but then to go back and fix the broken rails of our electoral system, as I will do in my first year in office. Thank you. I appreciate that question. Thank you. Take a couple more.
Welcome to Indiana. What?
It's good to be here.
We've got a couple questions. What will you do with the illegal crossers? And
Yep.
is it true that they get to $2,200 a month for coming here?
It depends on where they are. I mean, in Chicago, so in the south side of Chicago where I visited, and but this relates to that last point, the last question that I got about where I was addressing national unity. I have never been in a room that was more in favor of my proposal to use the U.S. military to secure the southern border and seal the Swiss cheese down there than when I was in a nearly all-black room of supposedly mostly Democrats on the south side of Chicago. Because South Shore High School was being turned into an encampment for migrants. They're $7,000 per migrant per month, actually. Right? So it depends on the region and the circumstances, how sanctuary the sanctuary city wants to be. Here's my view on this. And I want to say this in a way that is and approach this in a way that is actually compassionate to our fellow human beings, all of whom we are made in the image of God. Many of those people who crossed that border in the last several years are good people, parents who want a better life for their children, who see a U.S. president, Joe Biden, who effectively is with a wink and a nod saying, you can come right on over. And so they see that signal and then they come over in droves. Let's just be really honest for a second. I will be. Maybe if I were in their shoes and I'm a father of my 2 sons who wants a better life for them, maybe I would be doing the same thing. I probably would be. If the president is basically sending me a signal that the laws don't matter in his country. But we are a nation actually founded on the rule of law. And that is why, as the next president, I will make the difficult decision, but stand by it firmly, without apology, that amnesty is not and cannot be an option. We have to take every one of those families and put them back in the country of origin. Here's something I will pledge. I will never break up families as I do it. That could be a deterrent to people coming, because that's the most frightening thing to a father who wants a better life for his sons, to say that if you take him over there, I may never see him again. We will not do that. We will take the entire family unit and move them back to the country of origin. I will end birthright citizenship. I don't think that just because you illegally cross to have an anchor baby in this country that exempts you from the rules. If you read the 14th Amendment very carefully, I think there's an argument to be made that that's already the current state of affairs under current law. But that's how we'll do it. Amnesty is not an option. Anyone who's in this country illegally has to be returned to their country of origin. And for a small subset of them who have the ability to make, or demonstrated their ability to make, unique contributions to this country and their community as a law-abiding citizen, they can enter through the same process, in the same line, that countless legal immigrants are waiting in to enter this country as well. So that gives you a sense of how I do this. My family has a saying that we live by, which is that you have to be strong enough to protect your kindness. And I think that in the act of being strong, we can't forget our kindness, but in the act of feeling like we're being kind, we cannot lose our strength either. And that is the way I will lead this country. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sir, in the area of foreign policy,
Yes.
and your last statement there kind of is a direct lead into my question.
Sure.
I'd like to get your thoughts on a national strategy
Yes.
that feeds the national military strategy.
Good.
The last time we've had a grand strategy, it can be argued, was with the Soviet Union and
Yes.
the containment of communism. We've been all over the map since.
We have no grand strategy in the United States today. We're literally just going through the motions of a largely captured establishment. And I think that this is deeply problematic. This isn't a left-wing or a right-wing issue, or it shouldn't be. Certainly is a deep divide within the Republican Party. I think I'm alone on that debate stage, certainly, with the views that I have. I respect the other views. I think the debate is good, but I am firm in where I am. I want to revive Nixon-style realism in our foreign policy. So here's what that means. My top priority is to protect the interests of Americans in the American homeland. That is where it begins. And I'm going to speak some difficult truths here. This is hard to hear, but it's true. We are badly lacking in basic defense capabilities of the homeland. Nuclear defense, non-existent. Cyber defense, non-existent. Super EMP, electromagnetic pulse defense. They could take out the electric grid. Non-existent. Space-based defense capabilities, non-existent. Russia and China have space-based offense and defense capabilities that we don't. Our national defense spending for the last 3 decades, since the fall of the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War, for the last 3 decades, our national defense spending has not really gone towards national defense. It has gone towards fighting somebody else's war and defending somebody else's border. Even today, as we speak, we're sending $200 billion worth of U.S. military aid to defend an invasion across somebody else's border without defending across the armed invasion. It is literally an armed invasion now across our own southern border. So I believe in a modern Monroe Doctrine. I believe in reviving the Washington Doctrine, the George Washington Doctrine, to say that we look after American interests while minimizing foreign entanglements that don't advance American interests. What does this mean, tangibly? End of the war in Ukraine. Not another dime of support. Do a deal that brings that war to an end. What would that deal be? Freeze the current lines of control. A Korean War-style armistice agreement. Make a permanent agreement that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. Those are real wins for Putin. I will admit that. In any good deal, everybody has to get something out of the deal, but we get a greater win in return. The win we get is that I will require Russia to exit its military alliance with China. The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest threat to the future continued existence of the United States of America. I know it sounds provocative to say it that way, but I really mean what I say. If we enter serious conflict with the combination of the Russia-China alliance, as I believe Joe Biden is sleepwalking us into potentially right now, with Republicans to aid him in the process, most of the Republican Party standing by him as he does it, I think we face a non-zero risk that the United States of America as we know it could cease to exist. I know that sounds extreme, but this is the truth. We do not have even homeland defense capabilities. We don't even know what Russia's red lines are. And we're waltzing our way into conflict with a nuclear superpower that has nuclear stockpiles greater than ours because we haven't stocked up in a 30-year non-procurement period where Russia and China were arming themselves to the teeth. So that's what I'll do in Ukraine. This deters China from going after Taiwan. Against conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom is like, oh, well, Xi Jinping might feel more bold to get to Taiwan if Vladimir Putin got a piece of Ukraine. No. Xi Jinping feels bolder to go for Taiwan if he knows that Russia's in his camp. But if we pull Russia out of the China alliance, his bet right now, Xi Jinping's bet, is that the U.S. won't want to go to conflict with two different allied nuclear superpowers at the same time, because he correctly observes that they would likely win. But if Russia's no longer in China's camp, now Xi Jinping has to think twice. This is how we deter China from going after Taiwan. I think, you know, the expanded partnership with India is an important part of deterring China too. And I promise I'm not just saying that because my name's Vivek Ramaswamy. Okay? To tell you the truth, part of the relationship with India, the problem is trust, dating back to the Cold War. And if there's anybody who's going to rebuild trust with India in a first term, it better darn well be a guy with my last name. But on a serious note, China gets its oil supplies running through the Indian Ocean and the Andaman Sea and the Malacca Strait. We need a reliable partner there to say that they would, God forbid, in a conflict situation with China, block that. That deters China from going after Taiwan. I think we should turn Taiwan into a porcupine. This is a word used by many, I would say knowledgeable military scholars today. The porcupine strategy for Taiwan. You know, people in left-wing media laughed at me when I said this, but actually many people who are knowledgeable about Taiwanese defense said this was actually a sensible idea. Export the Second Amendment to the island of Taiwan. Put a gun in every Taiwanese household. Train them how to use it. That'll make Xi Jinping think twice before he goes after Taiwan, because the Second Amendment was designed to keep foreign autocrats at bay. And in the United States, it's worked pretty well to do that. You think about Japan, South Korea, the role that they're going to play as well. Declare economic independence from China. We can't depend on our enemy for our modern way of life. The Chinese spy balloon flying over half the United States. If that were a Russian spy balloon, we would have shot it down in an instant and ratcheted up sanctions. We didn't for a Chinese spy balloon because we're scared. Why are we scared? Because we depend on China. We're addicted to China. Addicted to the fentanyl they're pumping across our southern border as part of a one-sided opium war. Addicted to the digital fentanyl they're putting in our kids' hands in the form of social media. Addicted to financial fentanyl in the form of our national debt that we don't have the courage to wean ourselves off of. And so I think this is how I think about foreign policy. Protect the homeland, declare independence from our enemy, deter Chinese aggression, recognize the USSR doesn't exist anymore, but communist China does. And as odd as that might sound, that I have to be the one saying this, I think it will take an outsider to get that job done. Reciting slogans from 1980, memorized by rote, will not work to address the unique solutions that we need to deliver today. And just as Nixon didn't trust Mao, I don't trust Putin. But I do trust other autocrats to follow their self-interest, just as they can trust us to follow ours. And that is how we project, and actually, more importantly than projecting, is creating true American strength while avoiding World War III, which we're far closer to than many in the foreign policy establishment are willing to admit. And the only way I will be a wartime president is indeed if Joe Biden sleepwalks us into one before I walk into the Oval Office. But even then, I have a clear vision of how we'll get out of that. And I hope and pray that we're not there. I will keep us out of it. There's only one war I will declare as the U.S. president, and that is the war on our own shadow government and administrative state here at home. In foreign wars, we're keeping ourselves out of it. Thank you. One more question, and then we'll stay for pictures, and I'll hang out for a while.
What will you do about the U.S. territory that Chinese are buying or want to buy?
Yeah, so we have to take a hard position on this. I will sit across the table from Xi Jinping, and he will know that I mean it. I will prepare myself before I sit across the table from him. We'll already begin the onshoring process to the United States. We will already enter bilateral relationships with Japan, South Korea, India, and elsewhere to be able to move some of those Chinese supply chains, if not to the U.S., which is my first choice, immediately to one of the allied nations. And then I'm going to sit, probably by late 2025, across the table from Xi Jinping and have a serious conversation. Say, we're done with it. We're cutting the cord. We are decoupling and declaring full economic independence from China unless you play by the same set of rules. No more forced technology transfers, forced data transfers, forcing companies to do your political bidding around the world. We're done with it. We're out. You know that we can handle it, and I know that you can't, because China's in a tougher spot than we are. But if he's not willing to budge, then we cut the cord and we're out. We will ban China from buying any land in this country. We will ban China from donating to universities in this country. We will ban U.S. businesses from expanding into the Chinese market. We will hold China accountable for unleashing hell on the world with the COVID-19 pandemic, using every financial lever, including but not limited to our national debt, to actually get that done. Because if you don't hold them accountable for last time, there will be a next time, but not on my watch will that happen. But you know what? That's going to be easier for us to do because Xi Jinping's in a tougher spot than we are if we have the vision to actually open our eyes and see it. The spine to stand up for who we are. His view of us right now. It's actually an interesting place to close this out today is, put yourself in his shoes. What do you see in the United States of America? He says, you all are addicted to me. You don't have it in you to do what you need to do to declare independence for me. So you just try and see how that goes for you. You are addicted to the drugs that I'm pumping across that southern border. You're addicted to the apps that we're putting in your kids' hands. You're addicted to the companies that jump like circus monkeys, asking how high when I say jump. From Larry Fink to to Tim Cook to Jamie Dimon, you name it. American CEOs, your biggest CEOs who you all look up to, tell your kids to grow up and be like, they jump like circus monkeys because I can hold my carrot of access to the Chinese market out as the tool that gets them to dance to my tune. So you just try declaring independence from me because you all can't handle the inconveniences that would produce for you. Well, here's the truth. First of all, it's when you're most willing to make a sacrifice that you don't have to make one at all. A little more Churchill, a little less Chamberlain in our foreign policy. But you can make some sacrifice if you know what you are sacrificing for. And that is this thing we call the United States of America. We are taught to believe that we are a nation in decline. That we're like the version of ancient Rome at the end of the Roman Empire, and maybe even worse than Rome, maybe we're Carthage. China thinks of itself as Rome now. And maybe Taiwan is Sicily. It's the way we see it. It's the way we're taught to see it. But you know what? I don't think we have to be Rome. I don't think we have to be Carthage. I don't think we have to be a nation in decline. The truth is, I think as a nation, we are really just a little young, actually. Going through our own version of adolescence. figuring out who we're really going to be when we grow up. And when you see it that way, at least for me, it takes some of the pressure off, actually. It makes sense. When you go through your adolescence, you go through your identity crisis. I did. You lose your sense of who you are. You lose your self-confidence. You lose your way a little bit. But we are stronger for it on the other side when we get to our adulthood. So no, I don't think we have to be a nation in decline. I think the truth is we can still be a nation in our ascent. Maybe we're even in the early stages of our ascent. Maybe we're not even yet at base camp on our way to that mountaintop. Still that shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan saw. That country where no matter who you are, or where your parents came from, or what your skin color is, or how long your last name is, in my case, that you still get ahead in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you know what, you are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is what we are running to. And that is what we together will revive to save this great nation. Thank you all for coming this morning. I so appreciate you giving me a chance to introduce myself. But God bless you. God bless your families. And God bless our great country, the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you.